Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our webcast. My name is Kim Nygaard, and I'm a product manager at Fishbowl Solutions. And today we will be looking at how you can simplify the management of standards, safety, policy, and other operational documents using ControlCenter with Oracle WebCenter content. I am joined today by Adrienne Walker from Ryan Companies. And so she will be giving some background. We're going to be featuring a use case and case study from Ryan, who uses ControlCenter with WebCenter content, and then I will be showing a little bit more about the technical implementation of the project, as well as doing a show and tell, kind of diving into how ControlCenter is in use today with Ryan Companies for the management of knowledge documents, policies, procedures, etc. So most of you on the call are probably familiar with Fishbowl Solutions. We've been around since 1999, and we work with content management, document control, and so we're going to be taking a look today at ControlCenter, which is one of the products that we have for WebCenter content, and how that has been used to improve access to information, findability, and information reuse. So really the topic for today's webcast is to look at some of the business problems that are caused by poorly managed content. And some examples that are often kind of fall into this category would be things like standards, policies, procedures. And we're going to then take a look at how Fishbowl built ControlCenter several years ago, specifically for the purpose of better managing these kinds of records and these kinds of documents, and then doing so, making this very easy for everyone from casual end users to document administrators to those subject matter experts who are responsible for content authoring. And we're going to kind of look at this through the lens of Ryan Companies' use case using ControlCenter to manage their own corporate knowledge documents. Just to give a little bit of background, so most of the webinar we're going to be talking about how ControlCenter was used at Ryan Companies. And Adrienne will give a little bit more background about Ryan, so I'm not going to steal her thunder. But before we do, I was just going to kind of lay the groundwork. So Ryan is a construction company, and if any of you are not in construction, you might be wondering, how else might some of these same themes apply? So more broadly speaking, some of the ways that we've seen ControlCenter used is around quality control and quality assurance. If you need to have kind of an audit trail showing how a particular policy and procedure was put into place, how long it's been put in place, what version was in place on a particular day, those kind of use cases. Used for managing safety, safety type regulations, and then also used in the field. One of the things you'll see in a little bit is how we've made it easy to access from many different kinds of devices. So whether you have people in the field who are on tablets or phones and need to be able to easily pull up, instructional documents, technical specs, things like that, that's another area where we've seen ControlCenter used. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adrienne, and she's going to give a little background on Ryan Companies and the project that we did with them.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me here today, Kim. Just
Absolutely.
As an introduction, Ryan is a full-service commercial real estate firm, and our focus is on providing solutions from building concepts to the sale of a building. So our services include development, design, construction, property management, and property sales. To understand the scale of our business, Ryan is currently ranked number 49 on the ENR list of the top 400 contractors in the country right now. Our current volume is approximately $2 billion, and we have 16 offices across the country and over 1,200 employees. Knowledge management is key to keeping things on track for us. So as far as some of the reasons why we started looking at knowledge management a few years ago, we've had a changing landscape over the last few years with our employees. With a lot of people set to retire, they're taking knowledge with them as they go out the door, and we want to try and mine that information and retain it for future employees. We also have a generational shift with millennials coming in with different expectations and work styles, as well as we have been growing. As you can see, 41% of our workforce has less than 2 years tenure with the company. Some of the reasons why we had a critical focus on knowledge management were the direct expenses that we were incurring. We have a lot of processes and policies that are intended to be standardized across the company. But when people can't find the right information, they often create their own processes. This reinvention of an existing process wastes both time and money for project teams. So we did some studies and learned that on a per project basis, this reinvention process was costing upwards of $16,000, which may not sound like a lot of money on its own, but with between 200 and 250 jobs going on per year, that starts to add up quickly. We also found that using old content costs money. In the instance of labor rates, this can be quite costly when putting together an estimate for a new project. The old rates result in a discounted cost to the owner and a loss of profit on the project. And in the studies that we did, that could be up to $25,000 per project, which again, spread out over a number of projects, adds up quite quickly. The last thing is the cost to bring in new employees. And to onboard a new employee when an existing employee leaves costs nearly 3 times the original salary. That cost comes from not only the new employee's salary, but also headhunters and search efforts. The process also costs us in missed production due to transferring between old and new employees. There were a number of reasons why we had looked at knowledge management as a whole. And before we got into ControlCenter, these points here were some of the main pain points that we were experiencing. I won't read them all to you, but some of the key points are just that we had multiple repositories for information, which makes it hard to find information and hard to trust the accuracy of what you find. With different databases and networks in different regions, it meant there were lots of copies and no true ownership of the content of the documents. Info could be out of date, and there could be multiple copies floating around at any given time. So it was a struggle to find information when it was scattered. The rest you can read, but that was really the main issue, is that we had out of date, inconsistent, hard to find information. When looking at why to change, a few of the things we've talked about a little bit already. It's changing corporate landscape. There's big changes happening within the workforce, and we need to be able to grow and adapt with them. We can also limit wasted cost by bringing people up to speed faster. This is huge for onboarding and also sharing information between multiple departments, or on a multi-region team, we can engage faster. Time savings is an immediate benefit to both Ryan and to our business partners. We're also able to support our strategic goals for our 2020 vision, which is just making sure that across all of our departments and across all of the offices across the company, the flow of information is consistent and quick. Access to relevant and applicable information also allows separate project, building, or department teams to share lessons learned, prevents recurring surprises, and prevents us from making the same mistake twice, which is especially true for quality or warranty issues. We also get a competitive advantage because we're able to quickly and efficiently provide unique project responses based on historical data that we have been able to capture. We also can ensure a consistent experience for owners across projects in different locations. An owner building in both Minnesota and Arizona can expect a consistent experience from all of our teams. And having continuity of service and deliverables that we can capture by having single source of truth information available to them makes a huge difference and makes us look much better to our owners. Over the last 3 years, we've had a number of successes and growth. In the 3 years that we've been using ControlCenter, we have increased our number of users from around 800 to over 1,200. We currently have over 27,000 documents being managed in the system, and we have over 50 manuals that we have created to use for both reference and training purposes. The tools in ControlCenter have allowed us to reduce individual training session times by 50% and give employees meaningful tools to reference as they move forward with tasks. Overall training has increased but become more flexible and on demand for employees. As far as what's next for us with Control Center, we're focusing on enhancing the access and enhancing the content. For us, that looks like working on the mobile access and working through Ryan's security protocols to get that set up to provide that remote access more quickly and efficiently. We're continuing with the cleanup of content, and we're also continuing to develop what the manuals look like and how the manuals function, because those have become much more integral to our processes. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Kim, and she's going to walk through how we got through these items and how we got to where we are today.
Thanks so much, Adrienne. So as she said, I'm going to walk through kind of an overview of the approach that we took for the project and several of the pieces that were in play. And then after we do that, I'll give you kind of a show and tell so you can see like actually what the capabilities look like for Ryan and how that's working. So to start, if we take a look at kind of the high-level overview of the components of this solution, there were several pieces in play. The first was Oracle WebCenter content, and that was an application that Ryan companies had already invested in, but it was only in use in very small pockets, so we kind of expanded that as part of the project. So Oracle WebCenter content is the foundation as far as the software, and then Fishbowl's ControlCenter product sits on top of WebCenter content. So those are the two software applications that kind of comprise this solution. And then on the services work implementation side, we had a Fishbowl implementation team started out by actually doing an upgrade of WebCenter content to get onto 12c, just to make sure that as Ryan was looking to really expand their use of WebCenter, that they were on the latest and greatest version. And then the next piece of that was to actually configure the WebCenter and ControlCenter environments to meet the requirements for the project. So that's all the things like setting up workflows, defining metadata, setting up rules and profiles that all kind of work together to best manage the corporate knowledge documents. And then the last kind of services piece of that was WebCenter content and ControlCenter both have architectures that allow them to be extended and overridden using customizations. And so there was a couple of requirements that Ryan companies had for their project that were outside of the capabilities of the products out of the box. And so our services team did some enhancements to build some very cool specific functionality for Ryan. And two of those things are manuals and visual navigation. And we'll actually take a look at both of those during the show and tell portion of the webinar. And I would definitely be remiss if I didn't mention the importance of having a really dedicated project team on the customer side. So Ryan companies, Adrienne and several other colleagues worked very closely with us throughout the entire project. And even before we got involved, she kind of alluded to the fact that they had sort of started this cleanup process and this inventory to try to make sure that the content going into this new system was of high quality. But then beyond that, during the project, they worked very closely with us to understand requirements, answer questions along the way. And that really makes a huge difference when we look at the project from a whole, having that close collaboration and partnership between Fishbowl as the implementer and Ryan as the customer. I also thought it would be helpful to kind of overview the scope of the actual content that was managed as part of this project. So the content really could be divided into three categories: corporate knowledge, manuals, and real estate archival. So corporate knowledge is kind of what you would most likely think of when you hear that. It's your policies, procedures, it's checklists for different types of inspections or construction activities, templates for bids or estimates, forms, all that sort of like official knowledge content that you want to have one specific place to keep it where someone knows and can trust that when they go there, they're looking at the right one. So that was kind of the first pillar of content. The second was the manuals. So manuals are really, in this case, composite documents. So in Ryan's case, they have a quality manual, they have an employee handbook, they have a safety manual, among others. And in a lot of cases, these documents are really one big kind of binder or thing made up of many other documents. So the safety manual might have several checklists, some procedures, maybe a form that you have to sign off on at the end. And prior to this project, this was all being maintained, well, manually. So someone was actually going in, finding all of these things wherever they lived, which was, on file shares, in SharePoint, in WebCenter, kind of scattered around, and then bringing them all into Acrobat and creating PDFs and stitching this thing up into one document, and then, sending it out to either, other employees or to customers. And so obviously that process was extremely tedious and very easily prone to human error and or becoming out of date, because you don't necessarily know if one of the component documents changed to be able to make the call, well, should I then go and update my manual? So you'll see some screenshots of how we address that. That is the second category of content that is being managed within ControlCenter. And then the third one is the real estate archival content. This is more of the transactional type of documents that are generated as part of a real estate process. And this was the area of Ryan companies where they were already using WebCenter content. So when I mentioned that it was kind of in use, but only in a certain pocket, this was the group that had already been using it. So as part of this project, we made sure that the things they were already doing, they were able to keep doing, and that we could kind of expand the use case without getting in, interrupting the workflows that were working well for them. But at the same time, we also kind of revisited their use of WebCenter and did a few enhancements and made some changes to make that process work even smoother and to tie it into some of the other work that we were doing as part of the overall project. So those are the three categories we are managing as part of this project. So why WebCenter? I think most of you are fairly familiar with WebCenter content, at least at some level. As we undertook this project and really from Ryan's perspective of, why would they choose WebCenter content as the foundation for this knowledge management project? Obviously, one of the points is purely that they already owned it. So there was, licensing advantages there. But even beyond that, because they already owned, several systems, as Adrienne mentioned, why pick this one? One of the big benefits of WebCenter, specifically for controlled content like this, is the flexible metadata, the fact that you can have profiles, the version control, all of these kind of enterprise class content management capabilities that you kind of would think of. Another important piece became the workflow. That was something that hadn't previously really been used. So we put that into place as part of the project. And then additionally, because of the architecture of WebCenter, it's well suited to integration with other types of applications. And in Ryan's case, that was integrating JD Edwards with some of their metadata model. So when someone is adding a document to the system, especially for project-specific content or real estate-related content, it's often tied to a particular customer or a building and a location where that building is either being built or already built. And so we did some integrations with JD Edwards so that when they upload a file, they can pick the project number and all of the rest of that data comes over automatically. WebCenter is also well suited to this because of the permanent link structure and the fact that even if you do have other systems in place, Ryan has an intranet and they have a learning management system, which are also important layers in the overall knowledge landscape, but they can easily put a link on those different destinations back to the official trusted source of a policy or a checklist and know that that link is going to stay current as different revisions get checked in. So ControlCenter might be the piece that's a little bit less familiar for some of you on the call. ControlCenter is a product that was built by Fishbowl Solutions about 4 years ago, and we've been adding to it and enhancing it ever since. It is an add-on for WebCenter, so it sits on top of your WebCenter infrastructure, and it has its own dedicated user interface for interacting with content. So the content lives in the WebCenter repository, but you can interact with it through the ControlCenter interface as well as the traditional WebCenter content interface. And there are mobile-friendly, tablet-friendly, responsive versions of this, or not versions, but it's mobile-friendly. So if you pull up a document in ControlCenter from a tablet, you're still going to have a good user experience. And it also adds some additional functionality to WebCenter content. In addition to cleaning up and prettying up the UI, it adds some new functionality specific to document control, notifications, lifecycle management, and I'll touch on a few more of those as we go further into the show and tell portion of the webinar. So why did Ryan choose to, invest in ControlCenter and use that as their really the destination for these kinds of documents? So one of the things that I think it's helpful to look at is the different type of people who are using and interacting with this platform. And the first category is really the general users. So we mentioned that user experience is a really important topic. One of the reasons that although Ryan Companies owned WebCenter for many years prior to this project, that it wasn't widely rolled out had to do with the user experience. And at Fishbowl, from a WebCenter implementer perspective, that is one of the things that we hear a lot. Like, it's not necessarily the most intuitive. People don't love the look and feel, and it's particularly challenging if you're trying to use a mobile device. So those are really some of the things that we wanted to address for all users as we were, developing ControlCenter, and then as we were working with Ryan to do this implementation. The next category of users is the authors. So those subject matter experts who are the ones responsible for actually creating the checklist and making sure that content is accurate. They may be frequent editors and authors, or they may be casual. They may have one specific area and maybe they're not updating it all that often. And so we wanted to make sure that regardless of whether they were heavy or light authors, that their experience was intuitive, that they knew when things needed to get updated and that things didn't fall through the cracks. So a couple of the things we did to address that, one was the way that we're handling manuals. So when you have to kind of stitch multiple documents together, you can easily do that through a graphical interface, choose the documents you want to include, and whenever one of the member documents gets updated and released, the corresponding manual is also automatically revisioned and released as a new iteration. The other thing we looked at doing around documents was project-specific copies. So we have this idea that you might have a master checklist for doing an inspection, but maybe you need to create a specific copy of that for one particular building. And let's say you're doing interior work, maybe you don't need to inspect anything related to the roof, those kind of things. So you can easily create these linkages and maintain the relationship between the master documents and the project-specific documents, which has the effect of both helping the authors who need to create a project-specific document do so very quickly and easily by saying create a copy, and now you have something to work from that's faster to edit. But also when the primary version, the master version needs to be updated, you can easily see here's all the offshoots that have been created. Maybe there's lessons learned within those or new things that I want to ripple back up. And then the last category of users is really around management. So from a managerial and administrative perspective, how do we make sure that the content that's getting released has been properly vetted before it gets pushed out to a wide user base? How do you ensure that documents, even if they were accurate when they went into the system 2 years ago, how do you make sure that they don't become stale? Kind of having that oversight to how often and when things are updated and the audit trail behind that. And so ControlCenter puts a lot of additional visibility and options to control in place to assist with that. So the last thing I was going to show before we jump into the show and tell is to just give you an idea of specific people at Ryan, what they might do on a day-to-day basis as they interact with ControlCenter. So for example, someone who's a QA inspector may log into ControlCenter and create an inspection checklist from a larger template. Someone who is in real estate management would get a notification that an insurance contract is approaching its expiration date, and they may need to go, renegotiate, contact the tenant, things like that, and they can be proactively notified that that's coming up. Someone in marketing may publish, an updated brand standard or a new branding document and wants to make sure that that gets pushed out. So they would go into ControlCenter to make that change, and those things can be rippled across other documents within the company. Or lastly, a superintendent may review updates. Say someone needed to update the crane operation procedure, and that person is responsible for reviewing those updates and saying, yes, everything that's in here is accurate and we're comfortable pushing this out to the rest of the company. So those are just a kind of a flavor of specific kind of uses and things that people might do within the system. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you some examples of 3 kind of overall categories, the way that people might interact with Control Center. So there's 3 topics. The first one is easily finding content. So we'll take a look at how you find content in Control Center, and there's several ways that you can do that. The next topic is around the accuracy of the content and reviewing it in a timely fashion. So we'll go through a couple of scenarios of how reviews work and scheduling. And then the last one is the manual add-on that we built for Ryan. So we'll show you this idea about being able to have composite documents that are stitched together as a hybrid of, or a composite of multiple documents in the system, and how all of that happens automatically. So we'll show you that in action as well. So the first category is to easily find content. And obviously, if you have everything in a single place, it's a lot easier for people to know and trust the content. And so within Control Center, there is actually 4 different ways that you can interact with and find content, and I'll show you all of them. There's a browse menu, which really provides for that structured navigation. You can do Google-like searching. You can do structured searches, which is the closest to what you might think of as like profile-based searches, so that's still supported. And then we created a custom visual nav for Ryan that I'll show you. So to start, we'll take a look at the browse navigation. And you can see this here on the left-hand side. Some of our customers call this like their virtual folder structure. Others call it, think of it as almost like a virtual table of contents. If you were to have like a 3-ring binder with all your policies and procedures, here's your tabs, that kind of a thing. The benefit of this is because it's WebCenter and it's metadata driven, you can have a single copy of a document and it can exist in multiple spots within this navigational structure. So if I go ahead and drill into this, I click on corporate knowledge, I go into construction, I go into standards and reference documents, and I go into the BIM VDC category. You can see here, I've located this VDC senior housing guide. So as someone in construction, they may think about, traversing this hierarchy in this way. And this is kind of one of the ways from a structured perspective that you can navigate the document repository within Control Center. And we call this our browse navigation. The next way that you can search is using keyword-based searches. So these can happen a few different ways. This can be driven based off of just the WebCenter full text index. You can also integrate Fishbowl, a topic for another webinar. We do a lot of work with search specifically and optimizing search and keyword-based searching. And Adrienne talked a little bit about kind of the generational shift, and especially with millennials, who grew up with Google. They're used to being able to type a couple words in the box and see relevant content. And so that's what you can do here with this kind of top-level search. You're searching everything you have access to, and we also integrate with other search technologies, Mindbreeze and Google, to provide even more enhanced relevancy as optional add-ons for Control Center. So you can see here, I search for senior housing, and here is the senior housing document that we looked at through the browse nav in the previous screen. The next option for searching and finding content is to use this search menu. So this is similar to the traditional search profiles that you might be used to in WebCenter content. So I can search for corporate knowledge, and specifically I want to search for documents. Upon doing that, I see the screen generated based off the rules and profiles that have been assigned to this particular search profile. One thing to notice that's a little bit different from this traditional WebCenter experience, for those of you who are used to it, is that in addition to the option to search released documents, if I have the appropriate permissions, I can also search documents in workflow and archived or expired documents. Those are things that are less easy, or in some cases very difficult to search using the standard WebCenter content interface. And so we expose those similar with the same kind of metadata options. But in this case, we're looking for a released document that we explored a couple different ways. So here, if I wanted to say I'm looking for senior housing, I know it's in the title, and know it's in the construction department. Again, I can do that search, and I can see that same document. So it's really a way to, depending on how different users think about content or what they're looking for, we're not taking away functionality that they may have been used to using, but we're giving you kind of flexibility to get at content in a number of different ways. But this is always the same document. The last kind of most unique and pretty cool way that you can search for content is through what we call the visual nav. So this is a Control Center dashboard. I kind of jumped past this on the first slide, but this is what you see when you first log into Control Center. So we talked about how you can use the browse nav when you first log in to be able to drill down. But the other thing that we have for Ryan is this visual nav. So this graphic here is a representation of Ryan's delivery framework. So if I click into here, you can see across the top is the different phases of managing a building, and down the side is different departments and groups within Ryan companies. So if I'm in construction and I'm in the pre-design and pre-construction phase, I can go here and I can see all the different kinds of content, and not content, but topics that have to happen during that phase. And if I click on any one of these, it's actually going to take me to the search results within Control Center that have been tagged and categorized as that department and that project phase. And so again, you can see here, this is a different way to get to this same document. Now, if I were to go ahead and click on this, from any of the places that we looked at, regardless of how I found it, once I'm here in this document list, I can click on the document and I can see all the metadata for it, the actions I can take, I can see the web viewable. And you'll notice that if I scroll down a bit, on the bottom, I'm actually able to see kind of a highlighted markup of where in the framework, where in the delivery process this document might be relevant. So you notice I clicked on one particular square earlier, but we have these multi-value metadata fields. So this particular document can actually be linked to and visible from many different places. And then when you're actually looking at the document, you can tell, okay, I'm in these parts of the process. That's when this document is relevant. So that kind of gives us an overview of how you find content within Control Center and several different options that you have. The next topic we're going to look at is ensuring accuracy and timely reviews. So we put some controls in place to do this both before a document is released for general use and then also after it's released. So before it's released, if it's a brand new document, it goes to the assigned owner for review. And then there's also a gatekeeper in place to either handle documents that aren't reviewed in a timely fashion or are brand new to make sure that they are categorized appropriately. And then after the document is released, based on the schedule, it will get kicked back for review to say, hey, this has been out there for whatever the time frame, 2 years. It's time to take a look and make sure everything's still up to date. And so when that happens, the reviewer gets 60 days notice to do that. If they don't act in time, the document will get marked as expired, but it'll still be searchable in the system because for the use case here, we don't want to pull that out. We have different customers who do it different ways, but in Ryan's case, most of the time, there's still a lot of valuable content there. We don't want to pull it out of circulation, but we kind of want to give someone a warning. So we can take a look at how that works. So as you're adding a new document to the system, one of the things that you have to specify in this particular implementation is the owner and the review cycle. So right off the bat, we're defining kind of who that person is that's going to be assigned to this in various places within the workflow, as well as how often it should be reviewed. Once that gets checked in, it's going to then get routed to that person for review. And within this dashboard that we looked at a little bit ago, you can see there's a status summary. So as soon as you log into Control Center, you can see what's assigned to you, what you need to take action on. So I have one document in workflow that's assigned here. And when I click on it, you can see we're actually able to alter the instructions, provide some additional context. So we're asking the owner to review the document, make sure that everything looks accurate. They can put in comments if they like, and then they can approve it. Otherwise, they can reject it and send it back for additional changes. If the owner either doesn't review it in time, or if it's a brand new document coming into the system for the first time, it goes to a second gatekeeper review step. And so that serves two purposes. One, to make sure it doesn't go into a black hole if the owner doesn't take action, and two, to ensure that upon submission of brand new documents, that they get categorized correctly into these different structures, places within the delivery framework, because that framework is really important, and it's kind of a shared language that everyone uses at Ryan. So the goal is to really make sure that things are properly categorized, and then that also has implications for them showing up in the right spots within the browse nav and within the visual nav, so kind of setting the stage to make sure that new things coming in are put in the right categories. That's one of the jobs that the gatekeeper does during this review process. Once the document is released, it becomes available for searching, browsing, visual nav, all those good things. Once it is then reaching its expiration date, you notice that we said it needed to be reviewed every 1 year. So upon that 1 year time frame, the document owner will get advance notice that they should review the document. And scheduled reviews are similar to workflow, only there's a few different options that you have. So one of the options is to say no change necessary. So this will log that who it was assigned to, and the fact that they said, you know what, I reviewed this, I don't need to make any changes to it. And then alternatively, they could say it's, obsolete, we want to actually let it expire, or it's, I need to make a few changes, upon which they can check it out and begin that process. But if it's still current, they can say no change necessary. That will renew it for another review cycle, and then it will no longer have the expired mark. If they don't take action in time, it will have this expired mark saying when it expired and then who the owner is, so that if you need to double check something with them, you kind of know who to go contact. So the third thing we're going to look at is manual assembly, and this is the composite documents that we've mentioned a few times. Some examples of these are the safety manual, quality manual. Each manual is comprised of multiple other managed content items from within ControlCenter. And as part of the requirements for managing manuals, there needed to be a way to add and remove content, to select the order that the content would appear within the manual, and then every time any of the documents within the master manual get updated, it would automatically check in a new revision. So you wouldn't have to do anything. The latest released version of the manual would always be comprised of the latest released versions of the content, but all of those things would be versions within WebCenter, so that you could go back and see, on April 5th, what version was in use, and you would have that history. And we do this for both master documents as well as project specific. So within the manuals themselves, you can have master versions and project specific versions of the manuals. So let's take a look at that. Here's an existing manual. So we have a superintendent manual, and you can see here it currently was released on 6/21, and it has 32 pages. And if you look at the document type, it's been flagged as a corporate knowledge manual, the profile and the way that we identify the type of content. And so if you click view content information for this document, which is a manual, you'll see the similar kind of content info page that you would see for other content within ControlCenter, but you'll have a new tab called Documents in Manual. And this is some custom functionality that we implemented specifically for Ryan companies to be able to handle, ordering these documents, editing them, removing them. So from here, I can see everything that's currently in the manual and the order that it will show up. And if I want to add more documents, I can go into the add view, I can do searches, I can check, boxes for other content, one or more things. I can start adding more content to my manual. So I say add selected, now it goes into the list. I'm going to get a little warning that I've started editing this manual and it is in edit mode, and so I can go click and add more documents. And once I'm done making my changes to the structure of the manual, I can publish it. So when you're actually editing the definition of what's in the manual, it'll go into edit mode and you can click publish. When you actually have a published manual, you don't have to take any action, or the user doesn't have to take any action in order to have it stay current and be made up to date. So I'm going to click the publish, and now you can see I get a new revision of this generated. It has a bunch more pages from all of the other documents that we added, and then it also has an updated release date so you can see when that was generated. So that's really a pretty good summary of some of the ways that Ryan is using Control Center and some of the ways that Control Center can be used in general. We're getting close to the end of our 45-minute webinar. So if you want to learn more about Control Center, you can certainly go reach out to Fishbowl, and we'd be happy to give you a one-on-one demo, answer any questions, show you kind of how it's been used with other customers. I am going to open it up for a couple minutes of questions, and any questions that we don't get to, we can certainly follow up with you after the fact. One of the questions I didn't mention at the beginning, but I get a lot is this being recorded? So we are recording this webcast. Anyone who registered, who attended or didn't attend today will get a copy of that recording, so you can go back and reference anything. So if you can, submit your questions in the chat window, and we'll take a few of them on the air, and then we will follow up with any that we don't have time for. So there's a question about what happens if the document owner leaves the company. Can the owner be an alias instead? Yes, you can have the owner be an alias, or you can have the owner be multiple people as opposed to just one person. You can also even put escalation levels within the scheduled reviews, which we didn't really talk about, but you can have it go to one person or alias to start, and if that person doesn't take action within a certain time frame, it can add additional people to the group. So you have some different options there for handling scenarios such as someone leaves the company and all their documents not ending up in a black hole. There's a question about support for iOS. So I think the question is probably asking, so the mobile, we didn't really show too much. There was a few screenshots, but Control Center is a web application, so it's all accessed through the browser. There's not a specific Control Center mobile app like you would install from the App Store, but it's all mobile friendly. So when you pull it up from a phone, you're going to get a nice phone-friendly, smaller form factor than you would if you were to pull up the same URL from your desktop. And then we have a tablet kind of in between look and feel as well. And within the Control Center configuration itself, you can actually define things like you can adjust the views for what we call the table view and the list view. So the smaller form factor for your phone, you can specifically kind of adjust what shows up there versus what shows up when you're looking at the full screen view. There's a question about the documents being edited within the system versus checked out. So with Control Center, like Ryan's using, what you saw today, the documents would be checked out fairly similar to how they would be through the traditional WebCenter content interface. But the question prompted me to have to give a little plug. So we're in the process of releasing a brand new product that allows you to edit documents directly from the browser using Office Online Server. So you could edit Word docs. You could even do it collaboratively, like many people are familiar with functionality in Google Docs and Google Drive. So very likely we could combine those two things together. But if you're interested in kind of in-browser editing versus checkout, we'll be happy to follow up with you with more info on that, because that's actually something that we're working on right now that we're pretty excited about. There's a question about, is it possible to upload a schedule by a batch? If you could maybe clarify, I'm not totally sure if I understand the question, but perhaps what it's asking is you can define like overarching scheduling rules. So you might say all documents within a particular profile, or all documents with a particular department need to be reviewed on a certain schedule and have a shared rule that applies to many documents based on a query, rather than having to define it one by one. What we saw is where I pick the review interval and I say 1 year, but you can do it, yes, so that the clarification. So yes, you can do it programmatically to many files in your system at once. You can do it retrospectively. So if you already have the content in your system, you can go and apply the rules, even if they didn't have review cycles when they were originally checked in. And yes, you can do that programmatically. So I think we are getting to the end of our time. There's a couple other questions that we didn't get to, but we will follow up with each of you individually after the webcast. I really appreciate everyone's time in joining today. And certainly, if you have a question that you think of after the fact, don't hesitate to reach out. You can always send a note to info@fishbowlsolutions.com or go on our website and drop a comment in the comment box at the bottom, and someone will be happy to get back to you. And again, Adrienne, I really thank you from Ryan for joining us today and kind of sharing your experience. Hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.